What's good? What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Urban Platform Speaks. Make sure to like and subscribe as you tune into the channel. Check out the content. And with that being said, man, in this video, I'm going to speak on this Jaylen Brown situation with Stephen A. Smith, and also I want to connect the Celtics organization in with this, right? Because if you listen to Stephen A. Smith when he talked about Jaylen Brown, he alludes to he alludes to inside information that he have, right? And I believe it's coming from the organization, the Celtic organization. I also believe that it's part of a, not, I wouldn't say conspiracy, but I mean I think it's part of the play, just to kind of use Stephen A. Smith and ESPN to kind of to kind of control Jaylen Brown, right? And by that, I mean, what they want to do is they just basically want to put him in a certain light. I think they want to devalue him because I think a lot of people for the organization think that Jaylen Brown is a little bit too woke and a little bit too political. So what they do is they bring somebody like Stephen A. Smith, who, if Stephen A. Smith criticizes Jaylen Brown, then it won't, that'll go over better than if the organization criticizes Jaylen Brown, right? And so they play these kind of games in order to kind of control players, like Jaylen Brown, guys who are more outspoken and guys who like to really basically think for themselves, right? And then so they'll send Stephen A. Smith or or Kendrick Perkins at him. Whereas though you get like guys like Winhurst and all these other guys get to just sit back and watch Stephen A. Smith and Perkins just basically, just do the dirty work, right? So what I want to do is I want to go over the statements that Stephen A. Smith has made publicly about Jaylen Brown and the criticisms, and just point out some things. So here we go with Stephen A. Smith right here.
Kendrick Perkins just pointed out that Jason Tatum hasn't appeared on Jaylen Brown's program. You know where Jason Tatum was? Right here on First Take. Jason Tatum. So in other words, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum showed up on First Take before he showed up on your damn show. How? And then this is stuff that just flying over your head? You think nobody notices that hasn't happened? You're saying it's the year that Jason Tatum was down with an Achilles tear is your favorite year? Yeah. The year that Jason Tatum had to sit out, this closeout game 7 because of the injury he incurred in game 6. That's your favorite year? The year that you lose 3-1. Of all the stars in the history of the Boston Celtics, you the only one because you were driving a bus. Ain't nobody pointing to Jason Tatum. He was sitting. Right. He was sitting. He was in street clothes. You the only one. The only star in the history of the Boston Celtics that ever lost a 3-1 lead and surrendered it, and that's your favorite year. Why? Because you and your teammates developed better chemistry and camaraderie? Mm-hmm. You understand what I'm saying? Because you overcame adversity?
What happens? What's the remedy?
And that's your favorite year. Why? Because you and your teammates developed better chemistry and camaraderie? Mm-hmm. You understand what I'm saying? Because you overcame adversity?
What happens? What's the remedy? Given all these things you're pointing out, I'm with you. But that's why I brought up the whole trade thing again. What are you going to do about it?
All right, so now Stephen A. Smith points out the fact that Jason Tatum wasn't on Jaylen Brown's show, right? But I also would like to point out that certain players around the NBA don't want to do interviews with Stephen A. Smith. Certain players around, not just the NBA, but the NFL, they will go to Pat McAfee before they do anything with Stephen A. Smith. But Stephen A. Smith, he don't bring stuff like this up. I know that with that LeBron James interview, right, that LeBron James gave to Pat McAfee, Stephen A. Smith would have loved to have had an opportunity to sit down with LeBron James and, and talk about sports or talk about basketball in general, right? But LeBron James do not like, and LeBron James is not alone, but LeBron James it's known that LeBron James don't mess with Stephen A. Smith, right? And so if Stephen A. Smith is such a, and he's such a big draw and such an important part of ESPN, and LeBron James won't do an interview with him, then why don't Stephen A. Smith bring this? See, this right here just points to how hypocritical Stephen A. Smith can be when it comes to things like this. Like, he'll point fingers at somebody else when he could be finding himself in basically the same situation. Right. And so that's like, and I always talk about how the media can take your situation, or they can take whatever you say and put whatever spin on it. But Stephen A. Smith, he's playing this game. I think that sooner or later it's going to backfire, and it's basically people are going to be coming at him for the same ways that he point his finger at other people. Like the shoe's going to be on the other foot. And look, now I can't really. I mean, I think it's a personal decision for Jason Tatum to decide to go on to to not to go on Jaylen Brown's show, right? I don't know how close they are, off the court. I know that they work really well together on the court. So if Jason Tatum, some of his political stances are not the same as Jaylen Brown, and that's cool, right? But I know that these guys won a championship together. And so what happens is, like, the team and the networks will get together and they'll do, like, it's almost like divide and conquer. Right. So they'll put this information out there about the fact that Tatum did, First Take before he did Jaylen Brown's show. Right. And like I said, Jaylen Brown probably have a whole lot of political things on there. And maybe Jason Tatum just want to stay neutral. Right. There's no rule that say, well, if we're on the same team, we have to share the same political beliefs. That's not it. So that's, for me, that's not really a big sign of like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown not really getting along. But it is something that Stephen A. Smith and the Boston Celtics can use to kind of create a wedge and get the public on the side of the Celtics and Jason Tatum, using Jason Tatum to do that, right? But let me play some more of what Stephen A. Smith had to say and just point out how much of a hypocrite that Stephen A. Smith is, because, like I said, the same things that he say about Jaylen Brown can really apply to himself, as far as like people not wanting to be on his platform.
Up on First Take before he showed up on your damn show.
What does that have to do with anything?
Right. And so, like I said, he showed up on First Take before he showed up on on Jaylen Brown's show. But, like, how important is that, right? And that's the question that Jaylen Brown is asking on his platform.
What? This is journalism? This is why I started streaming, chat. What does that have to do with basketball? What does that have to do with performance? What does that have to do with anything relative to, like, the game? You know what I mean? It doesn't. And this is where, why people call him out, because he uses his platform and his nature. And his nature can be, this causes issues. So this is a narrative that he's creating. This is in journalism. This is him making his own opinion and formalizing it about what I had to say on his platform. And this is why, respectfully, a lot of people say, fuck Stephen A.
And that's true. What Jaylen Brown just said, like I said, a lot of people will not, he's talking about one person won't go on Jaylen Brown's show, right? But I think Jaylen Brown has more respect from his peers than what Stephen A. Smith has. There's so many basketball players and football players and professional athletes that don't want to mess with Stephen A. Smith, because Stephen A. Smith has a reputation of throwing certain players under the bus. But Jaylen Brown, in my opinion, is very respected amongst his peers. Even people who may disagree with Jaylen Brown's political, some of the political stances that he takes, they still respect him, right? Because he's an honest guy, and he's really good at what he does, right? But not the same case for Stephen A. Smith.
Because this is the type of stuff he does, and then he doesn't recognize it. But he's creating a narrative saying that the reason why I'm saying that I had my favorite season is because selfishly I had a best performing year. Not the fact that we outproved expectations, not the fact that everybody expected us to be nothing and we had to fight, and we showed up, and we.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I said. Like, no matter what you say publicly, they can take your words and twist it around and say a lot of people are realizing this, that sometimes it's best, you know. And I'm not saying that like Jaylen Brown should have did this, but sometimes some people are going to be like, you know what, I'm not even going to say anything publicly. I'm not going to do any interviews because this is exactly what happened. They'll take everything you said or anything you said and just twist it around and paint a whole different narrative. And like I said, I think that part of the reason, I think, you know, like he's being put up to this by the network and the Celtics organization. So that's my take on it. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave a comment. And with that being said, I'm going to check you all out in the next video. Peace.